And over to you, please, Bishop.
Thank you very much, Alec, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to have you all here. And as was mentioned just a little earlier on, I hope everyone battens down the hatches today. And that has nothing to do with COVID and everything to do with the wind that's coming again. I think our third big blow coming through. So anyway, I hope everyone's going to do okay in the midst of that. So great to be here with you today, and just like to begin with a word of prayer. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you praise and thanksgiving for the gift of this day. We give you praise and thanksgiving for this glorious Advent season, this time of preparation. We give thanks for the love and the joy, the peace and the hope born into the world in your Son, Jesus Christ, for the mission and ministry that we carry out in his name. Carry that beautiful premise of who Christ is and who he calls us to be out to everyone that we give thanks to leaders on this call today, those who minister in the various parts of the vineyard within the Diocese of Ontario, committed to their care and concern. We ask you to be especially present with us in uncertain times, when leadership is called to guide us through challenging waters, especially as we give thanks for the healthcare professionals, medical professionals, scientists, and epidemiologists who are carrying us through this time and providing us with the best advice and counsel that they can. We ask you to inspire and uphold and care for them as well in their very difficult task. We ask you to be with us now in our meeting and all that we discuss. Be present with us all as we come ever closer to the great peace. We give thanks for the love that is born in our. In Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen.
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 Okay. So just very, very briefly, and because I know there's a lot of concern out there, I was listening to the news at noon around some of the matters that are coming, and it seems like situation in the province and now in our area seems to be changing sometimes almost hourly, and we try to keep abreast of that across the 3 health units that we're dealing with. So I'll be turning it over to Alec, but just before I do that, as I do on every one of these 40 calls that we've had, to extend my deep thanks and appreciation to all of you for the work that you're doing, and especially in preparation for Christmas in the midst of this time of uncertainty. There's a huge burden placed on leaders, and all of you as leaders within your parishes and in your wider communities. These are challenging times, and I'm so thankful to have each and every one of you on this call, and for all that you do in carrying forward that mission that I prayed for in our opening prayer today. So just simply with that, I want to turn it over to Alec, and he will carry you through the presentation that we have today.
Thank you, Bishop. I think we have covered ourselves with the my charts up here. There we go. So, as the bishop mentioned, there's a great deal of on the move here, and this is all. I will always preface saying it's 2:04 or whatever it is on Thursday, the 16th of December, and what we know is that information continues to come in, data becomes more available, the situation continues to evolve, and both what's happening out there and also the understanding of it. And then the other thing that's evolving, of course, is the response to all of this from our governments, and from our health units. I think, as we mentioned and a good example of this, as we mentioned in the what went out yesterday. Yesterday, KFLA was and clearly is in one of the worst in the province. And just to put that in context, 2 months ago there was 51 open or active cases of COVID in KFLA, and yesterday there was 1,186. So in the space of a couple of months, as you look at the progression we've made through the various sets of guidelines and everything that's happened, it reflected that we've been easing up. And what we're seeing now, as you saw in what we put out yesterday, is that the situation is now requiring the brake to come back on. And that's driven by science. So what we're seeing is the continued piece that this is an aerosol driven virus, that it's less fomites, less things that you touch, much more in the air, and that the level of aerosol and the transmissibility, we'll talk about this in a minute, seems to get more increased with each variant of concern. And just for clarity, they have used the term variant of concern for the major ones. And Omicron is obviously one, but there's also various of what they call variants of interest. And some of the clergy who are much more learned scholars of Greek, I think Omicron is what, the 13th or 14th letter of the Greek alphabet. Those are all variants they've tracked and identified, but they separate variants of concern from variants of interest. And Omicron has quickly become a variant of concern. It is less, it appears, to have started in South Africa. And so South Africa has a few 100,000 cases of it, but it appears that's where the major outbreak has originated from. Again, it's difficult to track these things, but that's certainly where it's come to light in the largest case. So they have the most experience with it, and there's research available from there that also starts to provide a view for what may be coming here. And of course, what they're seeing is that there's about a 30% lower rate of hospitalization so it's a little, in one sense, less severe, but they're also seeing that 2 shots of vaccine are not providing adequate protection. That typically you're at 75 to 80% against, for example, Delta, but with 2 shots of you're only about 25 to 30% efficacious with Omicron. So changes in the game in terms of the severity of it. Changes in terms of how rapid it's changing. And so one of the important things to realize that, so in November in North America, 99% of the cases were Delta. Delta had taken the dominant position. In January, they expect 99% of the new cases to be Omicron. So there's a huge shift coming here. And the active cases of Omicron are doubling every 2.2 days. And that rate is accelerating. But as we start to look at how we respond to this, and you look at what the health unit, certainly in KFLA, does, and it certainly appears that KFLA is the leading edge of what's coming in the rest of the province and in many ways in the rest of the country. And that's back to the 3 C's we talked about back in March of 2020 when we began this journey. Closed spaces with poor ventilation, crowded places, and close contact settings. The 3 C's are what drive the risk. So those are the things that kind of underlay the next pieces. And of course, we continue to give thanks not only for doctors and nurses, but everyone working in healthcare, because the load has been heavy, it's getting worse, and it continues. So I think we all need to continue to give thanks for those that care. So Omicron is expected to be the variant. And the other piece of data I think that's of interest here is that one of the higher levels, so every person that becomes infected is based on averages will infect 4+ other people. And so that is a higher number again than what happened with Delta. So that's another instance of how much more transmissible this is. The symptoms are often less severe, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, So you end up with more mild cases, and you end up with a fair number of people, particularly younger people, that are asymptomatic. They may simply feel tired for a day, may not feel all that bad, and never actually show up, but they actually are carrying it and can transmit it. One of the reasons that it's faster to transmit and has a shorter incubation period. So generally, they looked at 10 to 14 days from when you caught the virus to when it would then really, it was in your lungs before it fully incubated. But typically with this variant, it's more like 3 or 4 days. And so the period for that to happen is much quicker. One of the reasons that happens is that COVID, that the previous versions all basically they multiplied quickly in your lungs, and that's why it was such a deadly disease for people, and why it did so much damage in lungs, why people ended up on ventilators. But rather than the actual lungs, this variant actually seems to be in the bronchi, and that's the two tubes that lead from your windpipe into the lungs. And that's where this virus actually gets into. So it's not as deep in your system. It grows 70 times faster than Delta did in that area. But if it does get to the lungs, it grows 10 times slower than Delta did. So that's just a little bit of the underlying science on why it's more transmissible, why it takes a shorter time to incubate, and why it may be a little less severe, because it certainly still can kill. It can certainly put people on a ventilation and intubated in the hospital. But that's kind of the science of how this virus has changed. And they expect it will continue to change in 2022 as it evolves. So with that as the background, what we put out yesterday, and interestingly, KFLA come out with another order, third one I think this week, that really didn't change anything in what we did, but they came out a few hours later. But what we're returning to is back to some of the fundamentals we worked before. So social distancing, in KFLA, it is mandatory. Pretty much kind of Hastings, Prince Edward, there's been an order there, but we fully expect that later in the week or early next week, the province, basically, Kieran Moore has made the statement that he intends to issue provincial orders that will take the place of kind of the patchwork that's happening at the health unit level today. But you've seen some disconcerting notes from the officer in Leeds, Grenville, Lanark, as the numbers there have shot up. Hastings, Prince Edward has taken steps, and again, they're limiting social gatherings. So I think we'll see provincial standards certainly by early next week, are what's likely to come. But right now in KFLA, our churches, we return back to social distancing, capacity driven. I expect, and that's still a recommendation for the other two areas. But that again goes back to the capacity of the church is limited to the number that can be socially distant. And that is to determine the capacity. Now you can still seat two people together, a couple can still seat, a family can still seat, but the overall capacity can't exceed the number of people that can be. So you're back to where you were in the previous iterations of restrictions. The flexibility across the diocese for mass to be removed by people speaking at a various single person at a given point, that has now been suspended. We are back to masks by all at all times. We're reinforcing again that self-assessment, and so each person, whenever they enter the church, needs to confirm that they have self-assessed. And again, you need to make sure that you've got that self-assessment form posted so it's clear. But again, it is important that people acknowledge that they have asked themselves those questions and they're not carrying any symptoms. Social activities, and unfortunately, I know this was an exciting part for many, but that including coffee hour is now suspended. And again, that's following on the risk factors that the health units are seeing where it is the social settings that are causing some of the outbreak. Food and drink, we're back to not being served. It can be distributed, but not consumed in the building. So we had a church that had an event planned where they were handing out, where they were going to have cupcakes to celebrate. You can still hand the cupcakes out. They need to be individually covered, but they can be taken home, but can't be consumed in the church. So food and drink are again restricted. Congregational singing, we've had a lot of discussion with this at the provincial level, a lot of discussion with our epidemiologist priest in Ottawa. We're going to leave that in place, at least for now. But again, the real best advice is to try and sing as softly as possible, and not really to raise the voice any more than normal speaking voice. So obviously, when you sing loudly or you even speak loudly, you're projecting farther. You're putting more exhalation pressure, and that potentially pushes the virus farther if you are infected. So we are continuing to have that option, but again, it's fully masked, and we're asking that it be done softly, and that people be instructed around that. And I know that Christmas Eve, it's hard not to bellow out, and as an organist, I would play in a manner and the choir would sing in a manner which would get people to raise the roof with "O Come All Ye Faithful," with "Hark the Herald," but we just need to ask people to constrain. Contact tracing, it needs to continue. One of the things that is clear is that the health units, and particularly here in KFLA, they are overwhelmed. And they are basically doing less follow-up. So it becomes more important for us, so that if someone does, we are able to, you're able to follow up if there is someone that reports. Because, one of the rapidly quoted ones here is McKinnon Brothers, one of the micro brews. They had a large Christmas market. That became an outbreak site. And there was so many people affected, the health unit was unable to contact everyone. And they simply announced, if you were there, you need to isolate, you need to get tested, you need to remain quarantined. So contact tracing at the church level remains important, so that can be followed up. And then ventilation, again, talking about aerosols, ensuring that there is good ventilation remains an essential part of protection. Nothing new on this page, but just a reminder, physical distancing, and that remains a key piece. Masks remain a critical piece, and vaccination again is a frontline piece. That hasn't changed. It's been underscored. Assessment. And assessment is really part of the screening strategy. If you separate out how the things you are doing when you're building your defense in your safety plan. Self-assessment, ask people, every time you enter, we talked about, do you have symptoms? The antigen, the rapid test, where you decide to use that is a screening tool that's part of individual self-assessment. It's not a diagnostic tool. People get confused. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Proof of vaccination is part of assessment. Again, the risk for someone who is not vaccinated, both to themselves and to others. The drive that's going on now for boosters. We're now seeing, as of now, anybody over 18, 3 months after their last shot can now get a booster shot. So that's rapidly changed as the province jumps to try and support the health units to get that to happen. And then finally, the other thing that we did have talked about a few times, and one that we use here at the Diocesan Center, you can also use a temperature, a thermometer, to check people's temperatures. And obviously you don't want that to be an oral thermometer. You want that to be a non-contact infrared thermometer. Here at the Diocesan Center, we do have one mounted on the wall. You simply lean towards it with your forehead. They can be bought for under $50. And they can either be wall mounted or handheld, but it's another method of, because again, one of the symptoms being fever, and it again gives you an additional layer that you can take. We have talked about the rapid, or what are called antigen test kits. They are part of a screening, not a testing defense. They are called a test kit, but they are actually not, they are a screening test, not a diagnostic test. The what's called PCR test is the diagnostic test. That detects minute levels of the virus. And it detects, because it happens with, picks up minute levels, it means that very early on when you've been exposed to it, it can pick up that you have been exposed. The antigen test is more dependent on higher levels having built up in your system. So the issue there is that there's about 85% accuracy with these rapid test kits. They're a good thing, but it's important to realize that the accuracy on them is about 85%, and that's still an issue. And that they sit about 80 to 85%, and the false negatives are the concern. That they will read negative, but they are actually positive because there wasn't enough virus load to carry that. So that's the data that again has been reported. So that those kits are useful, but they're part of a screening process. They are typically used in asymptomatic cases. So when you go to a clinic, you end up typically with a PCR test that takes lab results. You can see here what those kits look like. I know a number of folks are going, what do they even look like? They basically, you do not put the swab up as deep as they go with the PCR test, but and then there's a training video, because again, the accuracy of the result is much like the accuracy of anything else. It's based on being able to read it. So there's a quick online videos around how you take a test and how you read a test. And again, validity and accuracy depend on being trained to use it. So where you decide to use it, it needs to be used basically at the entry to the church, so that they can, and that the church can prove for those that are required either by the diocesan policy or by the restricted option. You do have the option of using a rapid test kit as a substitute. So where you have leaders, like for example, lay readers, if the leadership of the church, if the wardens and the incumbent so select, they can use a rapid test done at the church no more than an hour before, as a substitute for those that can't or won't be vaccinated. That's a local option you can select. The availability of those tests is a local piece. They're available, the health units for the most part direct how they're available. A number of them are available through chambers of commerce. I'm told some chambers of commerce will provide them to churches, others won't. That's what the anecdotes are telling us. The Red Cross makes them available, some pharmacies, and there's a growing list as the province pushes more of them out. It's not particularly practical for the diocese to try and source, stock, and distribute them, because there's no way for us to really estimate how many we need, for us to be able to stock them, for us to be able to get them out to churches, for us to take responsibility, because you have to confirm that you won't sell them. You have to dispose of them properly. There's a whole host of reasons why it just is not practical for us to do that at the diocesan level. The other thing is we do expect that we will be closing our office or reducing significantly our people in the office in the very near future. So that also makes it sort of impractical for us to act as a distribution site. Spend a moment back on ventilation, and again, this is one that several of us have had discussions. I know I spoke with George Vale, and they've got some quotes in that. They're doing things at St. John's Prescott. I know a couple of churches who've moved with purification systems. There are really three ways. I mean, ventilation, and ventilation is simply, you know, how you supply, distribute, and remove air, either by natural means through doors and windows, or leaky, whatever, or through mechanical means, where you use fans and exhaust and those types of things. Filtration, where you basically pass air through fibrous materials, and that's what, for example, HEPA, which are layered to remove particles from the airstream. And that could be on a standalone basis, or that can be on a mounted in your HVAC system if you have one. And then there's also purification, where you're actually sterilizing, and typically with UV that passes through it. And there's all kinds of areas there. One needs to be mindful of which method you use in producing ozone, because ozone can be a problematic thing too. But there are multiple ways to purify. But those are the three things. One is as simple as keeping doors and windows open. The second is using filters. And the third is purification. And of course, there are systems that use some combination of the three. One of the challenges is that it's different depending upon your building. We have buildings of different size, different amounts of insulation, different structural considerations. Some have more windows and doors, some have windows that open, some don't. You know, some have several doors and they're positioned well. Some are better insulated. Some have, you know, different HVAC systems. Some have none. We got a few older churches that there isn't one, or there used to be a wood stove. Some have heaters. Some have furnaces and ducts. In some cases have air conditioning. Some have boilers and radiators. So there's a wide range of HVAC available. There's different electrical. Some churches have, you know, there's electrical outlets, etc. Some churches have the power at the panel. Some churches are already at a max, and you put anything else in, you're going to start blowing circuit breakers. So there's factors there that need to be considered. There's the use of the building. Some, you know, again, airing a building out before use and after. But some buildings are used fairly frequently. Some buildings are used with more people, and some are used by the community. And then there's, of course, resources. It costs money to install. It costs money to operate. You have to have expertise to be able to figure out what you need, and you have to have access to typically to contractors to do it. So there's a wide range of things that every single building and church are different. So recognizing that has to be done at the local level, what we're proposing is we put a program in place to support churches that wish to make, as we hit the winter months, that wish to take steps to basically help with ventilation and inside the building. And that's either, you know, whether it's ventilation, whether it's filtering, or whether it's purification. So the proposal that we're putting out and looking for comment is that up to 50% of the cost, 50% of the cost, up to $1,000 for each project that's applied and gets approved as part of the safety plan of that church. And basically, you know, you would look to your local HVAC contractor for them to do an evaluation of your situation, give you what the options are, and then provide a quotation on cost. You'd then put that into us, and we'd say, yep, we can support that with, and we've seen a variety of solutions that people have worked through. George, you want to make any comment on what you guys are doing at St. John's? Sorry, you're on mute, George.
Yes, Alex. Well, we had a meeting the other night, and there's I think the biggest concern is the cost. Of course, we have a few people that just don't believe it's necessary, which I just simply can't understand those people. But the other thing there, we're going to wait until into the new year because there's a concern if things do worsen, and I hope they don't, but if they do and we have to shut down, there'll be nobody in the church anyway other than me once or twice a week to check it out. So I think that with us, it's a matter of cost, and what you were just saying is inspiring. And I think if we don't get shut down, because I've spoke to some people after the meeting, and the fact that this here, we're looking at the UV light, and not only with this virus, but it's good for flus, colds, and mold, and some of these old churches, and ours being one that has some bit of mold in it, and it may not take care of the mold that's on the wall right now, but it will, if there's any spores in the air, it will definitely take care of them. So I'm looking for encouragement, and I'm hoping there will be into the new year, but the big thing we said we'd hold off is just to wait to see if we're actually going to be open, which I definitely hope we are.
Thanks, George. So what were you looking at, just for everybody's sort of benefit for scoping? You guys were looking at a UV-based solution. What were you looking at ballpark-wise for cost?
Well, in our church, because there's the hall and the church, and they're together. There's two furnaces. We were looking at it would be a total cost to buy and install the two of them would be $5,000. Now I spoke with the gentleman that we were talking to, and he's actually he'll come over to our church if I ask him to, which I'm going to, and take a look and see if maybe we could get by with just in the one furnace in the hall, because we don't close the partition in between the church and the hall anymore. We find actually it's better heating system if they can actually work together. So, but the cold air ducts for the return for the hall and the furnace are right where the pews start into the church. So I was telling him about that, and he wants to come over and measure up, and he said that maybe if things work out right, that that one might draw enough. It would actually take longer, but it would actually turn the air over in the whole church and hall. And his recommendation was, if you put one of these UV lights in, is to put your fan on a continuous slow run, and then therefore it's working all the time. If not, the only time it'll work is when there's air passing across it. So his recommendation was that if you do install one, is to put the fan on low and let it run all the time. And he's going to check and see that maybe, just maybe, and I'm hoping maybe, that one would turn the air over enough for both the hall and the church. It would take, he said, twice as long, but if you did it in a time when once you got it all turned over once, and then after that, it would be a lot easier. It's just the initial part of getting that whole air turned over and brought through this UCB system.
Yeah. Thanks, George. And it does, again, airflow is a critical thing, and lots of things to consider. So it was I know I'd spoken with George earlier in the week or last week, and wanted to kind of share some of that, because I think that's sort of typical for a lot of churches as you consider this. So that's the proposed program. We would need to go to Synod Council to get this approved. I wanted to get, and I'll look maybe in Q&A, but we'll look for any feedback, or if you want to drop an email back to what your thoughts are. Would that be something that churches will find useful? Or, as you know, like George has kind of given a nice perspective on some of the challenges churches will have. So the rest of the guidelines pretty much remain unchanged. What we've done is just taken a step back in those areas that we've talked about and that were outlined in the document that went out yesterday. We continue to monitor, and like this is changing. It's gone from sort of the day to day to, almost hourly. The reality for us is we may make the restriction that applied to KFLA may quickly move to the rest of the diocese. And please again, we normally talk about deaneries, but in this case, we have to talk about health units. So we're not talking about Frontenac because, for example, St. Mary Magdalene Napanee is part of Quinte Deanery, but is part of KFLA from a health unit perspective. So you need to look at what health unit you sit in, but it's quite reasonable to expect that the distancing requirement, which is requirement in KFLA and optional for the other two health units, may well become requirement for all very quickly. But basically, with these steps that we have taken, we really have gotten ourselves back to the point where the next step, if required, would be closure again. Because they're really, with people now fully distanced, masked, all the steps we have in place, if the situation deteriorates and we get driven any farther, we are back to a full closure. And we all know no one wants to go there. The most common question we get is, what do we plan for Christmas? And at this point, you should plan obviously within these guidelines, but you should make contingency plans in the event that, in a week's time, because a week from today will be the 23rd, it's entirely possible that there could either be an edict from the province or there could be just such overwhelming drive of this that the decision's made that we need to again close. So, and then finally is, I think no matter what we do, no matter what each church decides, we have a lot of people that are going to choose not to come to church Christmas because of fear, because of concern for their health, because of concern for other people's health, but just, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So we need to continue to make sure that our online is there, and to have as a contingency that if the building does close, what are we going to do? And each church needs to have that plan. We hope and pray that we will get through Christmas. We hope and pray we'll get through January, but it does make sense to be prudent and make plans that plan for the worst case. Just a quick few other items. None of this new, but the package of the financial planning guidelines went out on the 30th of November. Again, I won't walk through each one of these lines. I don't think they're all covered in that letter. If you're a warden or a treasurer, you should have received it. We did have a few bounce backs. That's how we find out people have changed their email address, or the warden has changed, or the treasurer has changed, and we didn't know. But that you should have that package. That's got all of the rates and all of the changes. I will just go down to insurance for a moment, that as you look at your insurance, all other things equal, the rates did not change, right? And the rates are the rate per $1,000 of replacement cost. What does change is that they apply, and this year it'll be a 3% inflation on replacement costs. So on the property side, if all else is, if your replacement cost didn't change or contents didn't change, then you should expect a 3% increase on your on the property side of your bill. On the liability side, they increased director coverage and officer coverage, which, by the way, protects all of you on this call and in your roles. That's gone up by 15%, but given that's only, I think, $120, $130, it's about $20 is what the actual increase will be on that front. So that just gives you some idea. They're nowhere near the size of last year's. Last year we saw rate increases. This year, despite the claims record we have, because we're in the national program, we've been able to hold them. And And then there are some green sheets that we are just finalizing. I've got somebody helping us with that. And so we hope to get the last of them done in the next couple of weeks. So topics that we're going to get into early in the new year, cemeteries. And for those that are on the BAO distribution, they sent out a lovely update that talked about the changes that they're implementing for next year. Those changes are very clear, that driven by the auditor's report from the province, that their regulations will now be applied to small cemeteries, that there will be audits, there'll be compliance, the financials have changed. We need to get out of the pooled fund we have, and we need to set up individual accounts. There are those, so several people have identified that they'd be interested in being part of a cemetery committee. I'm looking to pull that together in early January. If anyone else is interested that hasn't already indicated their interest in serving on a diocesan level cemetery committee, please drop me an email. And I'm looking to get folks together because we need to, again, look at how we move forward. We're also in the midst of moving some cemeteries, either historic ones or some that have simply run out of people that are able to manage it and run out of boards, etc. And we are in the process of a growing list of them that are being transferred over to municipalities. On the insurance front, the intention is to have a special session on insurance. One will be to do a general update because as the bills come out, there's always all the questions. So then some information and education, but also I want to talk about some of the options that we can look at in terms of ways to have good stewardship of the money that's invested in insurance. And then finally, as we've talked before, and we are starting the conversation about speccing out what a bookkeeping system that we could do provide a service at the diocesan level for parishes. And really, we've obviously got ideas for how we might be able to do that, but it's obviously up to hear from churches, how what they would need, how that would work, what the fears are, what the protections and safeguards are, what the functionality needs to be, reporting and everything else. Because we are seeing, and some churches are well, along and have active treasurers and bookkeepers and no issue. But there are a number that are struggling to find either a treasurer to provide financial expertise, or in some cases to have someone who can now keep the books. Because as things have gotten more complex, the old, if you could balance a checkbook, you can be the church's bookkeeper. That's getting a little more difficult. So we're looking at the viability of being able to do that. So we need to have some discussion about how that could work. So the next regular meeting of this group is planned for, again, the third Thursday of the month at 2 p.m. So that would be based on January 2022's calendar on the 20th of January at 2 p.m. And with that, we will jump and go over to Q&A. As always, you can come off mute and ask a question. You can ask a question in the chat, and we do have moderation there so that your question can be asked. You can put your hand, as some of you have already done. One of the parts of etiquette and practice in these tools is to be able to put your hand up. So I will work through those that are that have their hands up to ask questions. Molly will monitor the chat, and we'll go from there. So the first hand I have up on my list is Robin.
Thank you very much, Alex, and to all the staff. Thank you very much for this briefing. It steadies us in these turbulent times. I just wanted to come back to the proposal of assisting the churches in relation to HVAC. I think you're absolutely right. The importance of it it has always been understated. And it was interesting to hear George's estimate, the quotes that he's received, and also the advantages of proper ventilation other than just for COVID. So I think I heard you even at that point say you were looking for some feedback on the suggestion of 50% of up to a maximum of $1,000. And bearing in mind the quote that George has given us, and most of us have the same thing with the hall attached to the church, would you consider, upon production of receipts, a maximum of $1,000 per request?
In terms of two separate buildings? You mean two buildings, therefore two requests? Is that what I'm?
No, that's even better, but I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking, because I presume from George's example, that would be one request for Prescott. Is that right?
That's correct. Each church would be a separate request. Each church building would be so in the case of Lakes and Locks, Newborough and Westport, and technically St. Stephen's would all be separate entitlements.
Right, but the church itself would be entitled to one expression of interest, and I'm just suggesting that perhaps we could do a little bit better, and instead of 50% up to a maximum of 1,000, we know it's going to be a lot more than that. Could we give, upon each request, up to $1,000 upon production of receipts? So most people would walk away with $1,000 for the church instead of $500.
Yeah, and that's, I think the intent is, maybe I didn't get that across clearly. The intention would be that we put in 50% up to a maximum of 1,000. Oh, I'm sorry, I get your confusion. That the grant would be $1,000, so it would be up to a maximum of 2,000. Would be 50%. Sorry, you're right. I now understand how I wasn't clear. Thank you.
Okay, that makes perfect sense, and I'm quite satisfied. Thanks, Alex.
Yep. So I would say you're 2,000, because basically I have seen some numbers that were in the $1,500 to $2,000 range. And again, this is all going to be different depending on what other fans and ventilation and all that other kind of stuff you may put in, and size. But we also felt $1,000 was a meaningful number without also kind of getting way out of line.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you very much.
Okay. No, thanks for that clarity, Robin. I'll tighten that up. Okay, next on my list was Wayne Thornhill. Hand up.
Thanks, Alex. Just to clarify, we had, as a ministry team, voted to restrict our Christmas Eve service only to fully vaccinated people, which means we could have opened up to more people. Now, are we still allowed to do that?
So you are basically in Leeds and Grenville, you are not required at this point. I'm not sure that's going to stay, but we recommend you go to the capacity that is based on social distancing.
What we've
in
been
KFLA, in KFLA, it's required. There is no choice. But in Leeds Grenville right now, you still have the option. That may disappear in the next. That option may disappear in the next week. It's recommended now. It may become mandatory. I'd like to tell you I knew, but then I also listened to the comments made by your medical officer of health, and it would appear that there's tightening coming in Leeds Grenville as well, or our provincial medical officer of health could, in the next few days, also come with some tightening. So
yeah, it's just that we've already put the word out, and we have a banner out in front of the church that says, proof of COVID vaccination required for this service.
Yep.
And kind of let people know we can take more people in, because quite often people have family members and so on, who come with them Christmas Eve.
Yep. And again, this is part of the challenge of our times, and being nimble, and communication's a key piece in this, because people need to understand.
Yeah, with the status quo, we can only put like 40 people in our church. And Christmas Eve, I don't know what we're going to do if things change, because we may have to put guards out front, and when we get to 40, tell everybody to go home.
or put another, or have another service, you know, but that is part of the challenge, and the communication of this then becomes critical,
Yeah,
because you
well,
don't
we
want
are
that challenge at the door.
Yeah, we are a 3-point church, and each church is having a service, one at 4, one at 6, and one at 8. So we would all be in the same boat. There wouldn't be an opportunity really to have another service.
The communication side of it may take care of itself if the health unit or the province says this is the way it has to be. Then it takes it basically out of our hands, because then you
Yeah.
can't. And hopefully they'll be communicating that so everyone will know. I hope we don't have to go there, but based on what we're seeing and the speed of it, and I was also listening to some of the news reports, that could change very quickly in both Hastings, Prince Edward, and in Leeds Grenville. But I think it's important around that, carry on until we get that word. It may well be coming quickly.
Okay. Thank you.
David H., I presume that's David Heater, but I think, David, you have your hand up?
Yes, it is. Listening to the last question, I'm a little confused about what question I really want to ask. We at St. Andrews in Wellington have had one quote already, and George Vale, you are $1,000 cheaper than we are. Same situation. We have 3 furnaces, one for the church, one for the hall, and one for the offices. Well, to put 2 in HEPA filters is what we're looking at, and we're getting a second quote. The $1,000 is very encouraging. Then you talk to Robin. Are you talking $1,000 per unit or $1,000 per church?
We are talking $1,000 per church.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yep.
The other quick question that I'll have, because I got a little bit confused when you were talking about these test kits, and there was some kind of comment about when you have lay readers who are not vaccinated. I thought once upon a time that everyone who was in some capacity working at our churches right now had to be double vaxxed.
That's correct.
So I don't
And
understand
that
why
is
we're
correct.
talking about rapid antigen tests for lay readers, because either they are or they aren't at
So
our church.
what was requested, because there are a couple of individual cases that have been brought forward where the individual, for whatever reason, or has a medical reason, but they're still not comfortable, we've given the wardens and the incumbent the option of allowing for a rapid test to be used at the point of entry, and them to be provided an exemption for that service because of that test.
Okay.
That's a decision that you as a warden and your incumbent, your brand spanking new incumbent, can make locally for your church. You do not have to provide that option.
Okay.
You have the option of creating that option.
Okay. That helps a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, and that was it, because we had a number of situations that, again, there's always nuances to every piece, and we try to be black and white. We started black and white, then some of the nuances shone through, and that's why we looked at that. Now, again, the other thing is the individual who's not vaccinated needs to be comfortable that it's safe for them to come to the environment. So it's a mutual decision that has to be made.
Oh, very clearly. Now, I'm going to ask both of you to put your crystal ball on, because I don't want to repeat, and neither do you, somebody pulling the plug at Christmas Eve service day, as we experienced last year. It was quite an adventure for everybody, and I know how difficult this is. The advertisement, and Wayne, this is for you, in the paper right now, ours has to change immediately in the Wellington Times for next week, because of the rapidly changing situation. And all I think any of us can do is contact our local media and apprise them of the changes and hope for the best.
Yeah.
I don't know what else we can do, but I would really like to know if we're going into just nobody in church. It sure would be good to know early enough to let people know that instead of scrambling at the last minute or having somebody at the church door say, sorry, go home.
And I think, David, we absolutely, I think I can speak for the Bishop and Wayne in this regard. As a leadership team here, we absolutely, two things. Number one is that's what we hope and pray, is that we can celebrate the nativity in our churches.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that we hope that what we have done with this last change will be able to hold us at least through Christmas.
Good.
That was our intention. However, what I also can tell you is that we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, today is the 16th. That gives us 9 or 8 days till Christmas Eve. We don't know in the next 8 days what's going to happen. And if those numbers continue to accelerate the wrong way, we don't know what's either going to be demanded by the province, by a local health unit, or is just plain going to make sense.
Oh,
So,
I understand. Yeah, I understand.
And if the plug does need to get pulled, we'd rather pull it early, not late.
Yeah,
And I
agree.
think we really worked a lot on this, and we sweat our way through it to come to the guidelines that we issued yesterday. And that was the sweat in that was really about making sure we try and get it right. And because again, we don't want to do, and the only thing worse than no Christmas is a last minute canceled Christmas celebrations. Understand?
Oh, yes, thank you.
George, I see your hand up. Vale.
Yes, Alex, I have a couple of questions and a couple of comments. First, it would be, when Robin was talking about there, it would be nice if the cost could be for each unit instead of not just the church, but we're grateful for what you are offering, really. The other comment I have is just a comment, like, we haven't been allowing any singing in our church, although you know, people kind of hum to themselves. And I'm going to, on either Sunday before Christmas or Christmas Eve, say to people, no singing, because I find, and I'm a good example, and I think you alluded to that earlier, that on Christmas Eve, some of the carols that are sung, we really get into it. And I tend to, you know, before COVID, I'd be really belting it out, although my wife tells me I can't carry a tune in a basket, but I'm very enthusiastic. So I figure if I just say don't sing, I know they're going to sing, but they'll sing lightly. But if I tell them it's all right to sing, but sing low, I know what will happen. I'll be hearing them across the church. So that's just a comment. One of my questions is, and I feel bad that your area seems to be harder hit right now. But if in fact Lanark, Leeds Grenville stayed down and your area went up more and there was to be a closure, would it be across the diocese, or could you say, well, the Kingston area has to because of the infections, but the Leeds Grenville is down, so we could leave them open, or would it be across the diocese, they'd all close?
So George, that's one that we actually had a lot of discussion about, the Bishop and Wayne and I, as we like I say, sweat through this. And this is the first time we've actually changed on a regional basis. I think we recognize that if the situation is unique in a given area, we don't want to, we want to try and be able to respond to that. So if, using the example of Leeds Grenville at one point was the lowest and KFLA was the highest, then it would make sense to still have different rules, different guidelines. But what we're seeing is that and what the experts seem to be saying is that KFLA is bad, but it's the leading edge. It's what's coming in the rest of the places. It's just coming at a different rate. And but if we can, and I think it's fair to say, and I can ask the bishop to expand, but we would look at the situation and make determinations that are based upon circumstance, has generally been our approach. Bishop, do you want to make any further comment?
Yeah, I think we're taking the leadership from the advice we're receiving from the health units in the province, and what we're hearing is that the health units, but the medical officers of health, they're putting a lot of pressure on the province, and particularly Karen Moore, to make a decision that is provincially based. So we keep watching this. I mean, it might be that the medical officer of health, depending on what happens between now and Christmas in KFLNA, makes one decision, and it may be different in the other two. So we want to try to be more responsive. That's why we're going by healthcare unit right now. So we're keeping an eye on it. But Alec is right. What is being told to us is that they believe what's happening in KFLNA is a leading edge of what they're going to see across the whole province. So again, we'll take it from there, but it might be that the point is moot come Christmas Eve if it's something from the province, but we will be taking our guide from either the provincial medical officer of health if he makes that blanket statement, or from the medical officers of health in the local health units.
Thank you, Alec. Thank you, Bishop. Okay, I have one more question, please.
Okay.
If the churches do close, if we have to close on Christmas Eve or for any service, will we be allowed to the incumbent to go into our church, because we could record in there and actually record a service to put out for the people in our and do it in our church?
And I think,
Like
George,
I would
actually
say
we're suggesting you actually plan that. Just hopefully you don't need it, but you do work with your incumbent and develop a plan that says, if we have to close, here's what we will do to record that service. Here's who will be part of it. Here's when we'll record it. Just make your plan so that if it does happen, you're ready.
Okay, how many people, if, and we're hoping we don't have to, but if we did have to, and the incumbent was willing to record one in St. John's, how many people would be allowed to be with her?
Well, based on the previous case, and again, circumstance will drive this, but the number was 5. That was the number that we used. That's the number every other diocese used, and that was the number that the health unit were agreeable to. So I would plan it based on a maximum of 5 people.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Fran, I have your hand up, number 1 on my list.
Yes, thank you. My question is it acceptable if the wardens and the incumbent and the congregation next Sunday make a decision as to whether or not they want to close the church until mid-January? We have an older congregation, and this is spreading so quickly that if there's one case in my little town, it's going to hit many people. And I just think if we choose to close, it will be a relief for some who won't be coming to church anyway because they are just too afraid to risk it. Is that a decision we can make without the diocese?
Bishop, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, certainly, Fran. And what we're trying to do with this protocol is make it possible, all things being equal today, for what can happen in the churches. But as we've seen with other things, at the local leadership, wardens, the congregation, and getting feedback, of course, from your congregation, the wardens and the incumbent, and you make that decision, certainly, because right now, and after having listened to the experts on this over noon hour on the newscasts, this is changing so rapidly. So, and I think we've already had, I don't know how many, but I have seen some emails of churches that have taken that decision, and that's certainly able to do that. But we want to try to make it as possible as of right now to see what it is that we can do. But I want to reiterate what Alex said before around, plan for the contingency for those who don't make the decision that you're talking about, Fran, and plan for the contingency in case things are taken out of our hands by the province or the local health units. That way, if you have to pivot, it's not going to be trying to throw it all together at the last minute. I'd say get that plan put together now. I'm thinking of doing a Christmas morning prayer service and recording that because I was doing morning prayer services back when we were in shutdown mode before. And so I would do that and have that ready to go too as a contingency. So, and then we'll roll on from there, but certainly, Fran.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Fran. let me just jump over for a moment. Molly, do you have any questions on the chat before I bounce back to the hands up?
Yes, we got a couple here. Oop, I've lost it. Let me just. There we go. So Richard Hetke asks, singing. Oops, sorry. Singing aloud for both open and restricted options. This is a bit confusing as it was only restricted before.
Right, and so it remains only in the restricted option. That singing, the ability to sing is based upon the social distancing, which was part of that anyway, and B, upon the fact that people are vaccinated to drive that. So yes, the singing still, and maybe that should have been a little clearer that that option still exists. But even if if you stayed in the other option, you can admit people who are not, but now your social distancing still remains anyway. So it's really now a question of, do you want to require vaccination to be able to sing, but the distancing rules stay the same regardless.
I think the important what we're trying to get across in the singing for Richard and for everybody else is that to try to make sure that singing happens in a speaking voice tone, not in a soft tone, and just because of the forceful exhalation, and I think that's what we're trying to get across there. But the other, as Alex pointed out, the other protocol stays in place.
And again, it's one that it's a local decision. There is not a requirement to allow singing, but there is that option that you can choose. And we had a lot of discussion with Michael Garner and the Diocese of Ottawa regarding is it safe to sing? And so that question, I spent some time with Michael trying to understand. And again, as long as it's kept, and understand the issue of trying to police that, but as long as it's kept at a low level with a mask on, you are reasonably, that it remains with it, and people have been proof of vaccination, etc., that the risk level of it is acceptable. It is not no risk, that is clear. But it is still something that is optional available to you. So let me jump back to the hands up. Pauline.
Oh, hi, would Elias be there? Hello?
Hello. Next, I got Pauline. I see you're on mute, but you're the next. Oh, not sure if she's trying to come off mute or. Okay, well, let me jump to the next on the list. Next on the list is Trish, Reverend Trish Miller.
Hi, Alex. Thank you. Oh, you can hear me. Okay, good. I'm off mute. For some reason, first of all, I was muted on chat. I don't know if other people are having that issue, but that's a sidebar. I just wanted to offer sort of a little bit of a temperance on our confidence in the antigen tests. It's true that you got the 85% confidence or accuracy, but that's for symptomatic people. When you're talking about asymptomatic people, a couple sources, including CBC Radio, White Coat, Black Art, the accuracy for asymptomatic is 35 to 50%. So people should really be cautious if they're using these as sort of screening tools before church services or family gathering, and just maybe do a couple tests like 2 days before or a day before, and just to build that confidence level.
Yeah, no, I think that is one of there's a lot of excitement about them, and the schools have sent them home with kids and all kinds of pieces. But again, based upon how that works, they detect in your, and you need a much higher load of virus basically for it to detect it. So the early days, you've not built that up, and so that is an absolute. And yeah, so again, we try and exercise caution. I can tell you there's some churches that are being very enthusiastic about them. So that's a choice that you make. Is it a screening, that's why I suggest it's a screening tool. It's not a testing tool. And it's a help, same as asking if people have no symptoms. Well, I did have a runny nose, but it's not COVID. It's a cold.
Yeah. When in doubt, screen out.
Exactly. Exactly. And that is a difficult thing for a lot of folks because we're looking for certainty. George Hawkins.
Yes, thanks. Hello, Gallic. As I mentioned before, Christchurch in Birth Rapids is physically in the city of Ottawa. Are you getting input from the Ottawa Health Unit, or are you expecting us to get it?
No, what we do is I use Michael Garner, who is a priest of the Diocese of Ottawa, who was ordained later in life, and Michael is a trained epidemiologist.
COVID boosters.
So
do you have any? Are you on a waiting list, or how does it get access?
We use Michael, and that he brings the Diocese of Ottawa expertise. And I monitor the Diocese of Ottawa's the communications and the executive officers. Yesterday, for example, I shared what I sent, Michael and Wayne and I set out. What went out, I shared that with the other executive officers. So we're all comparing notes. We're all comparing pieces and making sure. So we do recognize you guys are on the, I won't say wrong side of the street, but the other side of the street. And we continue to look out for you.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that somebody was following it, so we get the information if we need it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Look who's Molly, is there anybody else on the chat before I jump to?
Yep. Okay, we've got Bram Pierce asks, would church rentals, parish council meetings, and Sunday school be considered social activities?
So at this time, again, what they're saying is that the risk, and that's why they're focusing on bars and restaurants and places like that, because people being close together, and like in KFLA, they've now restricted tables in restaurants to 4 people. Because again, you can have 20 people at a table, masks all come off. And that now creates one of the highest risk levels. When you go into someone's house, you go to a family event, that's why they've limited family gatherings to 5 people. Because typically in a house, you don't often wear masks. A lot of people don't wear masks with family members in the house. So these are all risk factors. So at this time, the best guidance is for parish council meetings, etc. Bible study, ACW, take them online, right? Don't bring together the gallery. The recommendation from the health table and from the medical officer of health is, work from home if you can, work from home. So I think it's fair to extend that to say, church meetings, parish council meetings, PSAC meetings, ACW meetings, whatever, wardens meetings, men's club meetings, whatever. You should absolutely try to do as much of that as online as possible because it reduces the risk tremendously. As far as rental groups go, again, those groups are governed by the same sets of rules that we are. And so, social gatherings, and you can question whether Weight Watchers is a business or a social gathering, but it's also a matter of trying to make sure that you're consistently applying things within your church, because it's difficult to say to folks, for example, you can't sit 2 people, or in pews for a concert, you can have more people than you can for a church service. That just doesn't make sense. So we should be applying the same standard across everything in our churches. Julie, I think you're up next.
Hi, Alex. I have so many questions, but I don't know if we'll get to them all. I'm confused about the singing Because right now, St. Paul's is in the restricted option where we ask for vaccinations. And we have choral singing where the singers are 2 meters apart from each other, but 4 meters from the congregation. But we have no congregational singing because we opened up our capacity to our maximum, like our maximum of social distancing. So right now we're okay because we haven't gone over that. We only have about 30 people coming. And I expect with Omicron that that's going to go down. But are we allowed to sing? Is the congregation allowed to sing?
So if you're using the restricted option and you've done all the things you needed to do on the way in the door, including proof of vaccination, and people are physically distanced in the church, and they are obviously masked because everyone is masked, then they are permitted for congregational singing. Yes.
No, they're not physically distanced. They can sit where they want. So some are
No.
distanced and some are not.
So they must, unless there must be distance between family units. Obviously, you know, husband and wife can sit together. People that live in the same house can sit together. But there has to be distancing in place for congregational singing.
So what happens on Christmas Eve then? We expect to have more people if we're still open then.
And then you can't congregationally sing if you have more people than your distancing would allow. That's a choice you make.
So if we
And just want to jump in, make sure it's the congregational singing we're talking about here, because a lot of places have choristers who are singing. That's not what this is related to. It's the congregation being able to sing. So I just want to make sure that was clear.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking, because I know people want to sing on Christmas Eve. So, all right. So we would have to either we let the people come in, as many people that want to come in, or we limit it and we let the people that are there social distance and they can sing.
Recognizing that it's entirely possible that by Christmas Eve, there could be a restriction placed on social distancing, like in KFLA. The province may well require it next week.
Yes.
So that is that may happen anyway. But yes, right now, and I would still recommend social distancing given where we're on, given the transmission of Omicron, given all of that, that's still the safer practice.
Okay. And I think my hall rental questions were answered, but I did have a question about the groups that are meeting in the homes. What should we be telling them about that? Like ACW might, our Justice Committee.
Anything, and so the health unit would consider those gatherings social. There are 5, and so they would be limited to 5 people, at least in Hastings, Prince Edward, and Frontenac. And we would still recommend, again, for the matter of safety, our recommendation is still take those meetings online, whether you're in the church or in somebody's home. But when you cross the line in someone's home, certainly in KFLA and Hastings, Prince Edward, there's now restrictions. Reasonable to assume that's going to happen in Leeds Grenville too.
Okay, so it's 5 people, and I know we can't control this, but I'm asking if we're supposed to share this information. Is it 5 people, social distancing, contact tracing, self-assessment, and no refreshments?
That would still be, because again, it is the church. It's still a church group, so the wardens are responsible. Let's be clear. It says, you are responsible regardless of where they meet. That's why if you have a congregational picnic in the city park, the city wants an proof of insurance from you. Someone having a church meeting in their house would be fair to ask them to ask, we're insured, right? So you're responsible as a church, which means the wardens are responsible, regardless if that meeting is in the church or in the hall or in somebody's house or in the Legion.
Okay. That's all I have for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie. I'll go back and see if Pauline's there.
Hi, Alec. Sorry,
Hi.
I had the telephone call from a senior parishioner and I couldn't get to you. I
Okay,
have
go
a
ahead.
little change in direction. You
Sure.
mentioned a couple months ago about the CRA changing the rules on second party charity receipts. Is there any further information on that?
Sorry, my must have been my internet. I heard second and then I didn't get any more. Could you repeat that part?
The second party charity receipts.
Right. But they are tightening the regulations around that. And I have not seen anything further. If you want to drop me a note on your if you've got a specific situation, I can get clarity on your specific situation if you've got one.
Okay, thank you. I will.
Okay. So George, I see you've got your hand up. There's the only hand left.
Yes, Alex, thank you. Just one comment. When I was dealing with the HVAC guy, I spoke about HEPA filters too, and he told me with the size of our hall and church, it would cost almost as much to do the HEPA filters. Plus, keep in mind that HEPA filters do not kill the virus. All they do is contain it. And you have to have somebody get rid of those in a proper place, and then you're replacing with HEPA filters, and I'm not sure, they sure don't come cheap. So that's just for anybody that's thinking of going that way. Keep in mind that they are expensive. All depends on the size of your church. Plus, you like I say, they do not kill the virus. All they do is trap it.
Yep.
And the question, go ahead.
No, it's a good point, and that's why sometimes some of the units have both. They have a UV and a HEPA, and again, depends on all the different things. Because HEPA will capture dust and a lot of other things as well. So there may be other reasons why you'd put a HEPA in and or a UV. But yep, they are not cheap, and they need to be disposed of carefully.
You're right, Alex. And the report that I had from this company said that too, that if you do use a HEPA, that they recommend that you use the UV light with them. The UV light will kill the virus, and the HEPA will, like you say, it could be dust or anything else. It'll do that. Yep. My question is, you were talking about these thermometers you could get for handheld or on the wall. Where could you get them?
Well, the one that we have here, I got on Amazon, but most, I think you'll probably find that most drugstores would have one of the handheld ones. The wall mount ones, you may have to look. I know Amazon has dozens of them on there. I don't know about places like Walmart and that, but anywhere that does medical supply or that kind of stuff, I think would probably have them.
Oh, okay.
Ours
Good.
sits on the wall, and every morning and again, this is the practice at the Diocesan Center, when each of us comes into the office, we check our temp. And if you come to a meeting here, you'll be asked to sign in and to check your temp and sanitize your hands. So all of those things are, for us, standard practice.
Okay.
Okay,
for the one on the wall probably wouldn't work for our situation going into our church in the foyer, but every church service we have, I meet everybody coming in anyway, and I talk to them. So if we were to do that, I would have one in my hand and check them myself.
Yep, and I think they're easily available in most. I think a lot of drugstores and that carry them as well.
Okay, thank you, Alec.
You're welcome. Molly, any other questions on the?
Yeah, we still have two that are pretty similar, so I'll ask them kind of both at the same time. Julie Dax has asked, are we still allowed to, are we allowed hall rentals still? Excuse me. And C. Secker asks, how does the suspension of social activities affect our renters?
Right, and so again, at this point, that is still a choice that the wardens can make. you are the group, and the church is obviously responsible back for what happens. But if, for example, if it's a social group renting it, then, for example, in KFLA, that would be an illegal gathering. In Leeds and Grenville, it would not. It again is a local at this point, and that may change in the coming days. One has to ask with the risk levels where they are, whether that is the right thing. So I would think you'd need to be having that discussion with your rental group, whether it's A, legal, and B, advisable. So I think unless anyone else has a question, one thing we always, as the bishop is always, as we have these sessions, we're always talking about, but always want to say thank you. You folks are the leadership in the churches. You folks are the ones that bear both the making the decisions, executing the decisions, and when it comes to people who have to be told things that aren't what they want to hear, you're literally the pointy end of the stick. And so realize and recognize we really do appreciate the leadership that you all show, the time, the energy, the attention, and let's be honest, this community, we've built sort of a level of camaraderie and networking that I think is a great thing. So certainly want to say thank you to you all as we hopefully, and I live and pray, two things as I close, and one is that we don't have to have another call this year, that 42 is it for 2021. And secondly is that I do want to wish, regardless of how things play out, that everyone has a wonderful rest of Advent and a blessed and Merry Christmas. And we will turn back to our bishop for closing.
Very good. And I like that card that just went up there that said we can do this. And we can, and we have been, and we are. What a great team. I love that too. Excellent. Thank you very much, Sharon, for that. I want to just reiterate both of the things Alec just said in terms of my thanks and appreciation to you as I close, and to wish you all a very Merry Christmas. But also, I just want to take a moment, Alec, to thank you. You have been dealing with health, medical officers, health units, epidemiologists, consulting with your colleagues, trying to get up to date information so that we have everything as quickly as we can within our diocese. And as you can see, it's a challenge for both federal and provincial government to try to get up to the moment on some things. So we try to do this here. So thank you very much for all the effort that you put into this, Alec, and keeping us, trying to keep us between the yellow lines in terms of the information flow. So thank you for that. And folks, we'll close our 42nd meeting with the grace. For the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God, fellowship of the Holy Spirit, be with you all evermore.
Amen.
Blessings, everybody. Take care. Happy Christmas. And don't blow away today.
Thank you, Bishop, Alex, and Wayne, for all you do for us. Merry Christmas.
Privilege.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you so much.